Last class, we were talking about the children of Job, and we were talking about verses 4 and 5, how they would take turns and have feasts in the sons' homes. Okay. And when these days of feasting were over, we know that Job, he would get worried. He would send for them. Okay, so he would meet with them and then sanctify them. So some type of prayer, okay, some type of offering for them. And the worry that Job had in his heart was, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus, Job did regularly. Okay. Just FYI, in verse 5, when it says curse God, in the original language, it says bless God. But based on the context, we can tell that this is not to be taken literally, but it's like a euphemism, right? It's like it's understood that they might sin and curse God in their hearts. And I think the reason why they wrote it that way is they were very concerned with having actual text that says curse God, right, in the writing. So they wouldn't have that there, right? They would just write down literally bless God, but we understand it to be cursing God. The same thing in chapter 2 verse 9. Okay, same thing in chapter 2 verse 9. Same thing in chapter 1 verse 11 too. Okay, anyhow, this was Job's worry as a parent. Now I know pretty much all of you are not, don't have kids yet, right? Anybody here have kids? Yeah, probably you don't have kids yet. Some of the counselors do, but as a parent, definitely your parents worry about you. Okay. Yeah. And especially if your parents are in the faith, in the church, and they're God-fearing, they're pretty good faith, they definitely be a concern about your faith too. Okay. And so this is related to another homework assignment I want to give you. The other homework assignment that I would like to give you is sorry, this is getting in my way. How come I can't minimize this? Oh, okay. Okay, so the question I'd like for you to respond to in a homework assignment is, are your parents in the True Jesus Church? What kinds of worries pertaining to the faith do you think you might cause for them? Okay. Give that some thought. And then also answer the question, what kinds of prayers do you think they make for you? Okay. Actually, if you're at home, maybe you can even ask them. Okay. Maybe ask what kind of prayers your parents make for you. Okay. Yeah. So this is what Job as a parent was worried about. Okay. In the future, when you become parents, I think, and your faith is also pretty strong, I think this is your main worry, I think. Okay. Yeah. How is your children's faith? How are they doing? Okay. yeah, and you do everything that you can to also make them right with God, right? You'll send for them, you'll sanctify them, you try to teach them in the right way. Okay, and how come Job had this particular worry? Actually, it's pretty clear. There's a loose correlation between wealth and pleasure, right, with turning away from God. Okay, there's a correlation there in human behavior. I'm going to show you a chart in the next slide, but it's actually fairly common. Okay, when people eventually have a lot of wealth, they don't really have a lot of physical necessities. In fact, they are enjoying a lot of luxuries in life. It's easy to become proud. It's easy to feel like, oh, I don't need God. It's easy to feel everything that I have is from my own power, my own efforts. Okay? And then people turn away from God. Okay? So that's something we do need to be careful of. Okay? I'll talk a little bit about that more in the next slide. Yeah. Okay. So, but what Jacob would do is, because of this worry, Job would regularly call for them and then sanctify them. In a way, this is related to the concept of a family altar as well. How many of you guys, you have a regular worship time with your parents at home? If you do, can you please, give me a thumbs up or a clap? If you do, you can give me a Zoom reaction. You regularly worship with your parents, right? Okay, thank God, right? Yeah, so this is something that we always encourage members to do, parents to do, right? To establish their family altar at home. When you eventually get married and have family, this is also something you need to establish. Okay, you need to establish this. In fact, many of you probably will get married within 10 years. When you're already starting to begin a relationship with somebody, actually it's good to already set like a regular time to read the Bible with them and discuss it, share it, and then pray together. So even when you're not married yet, single, it's good to establish that. Right? And then this habit will carry on into after you get married, and then hopefully also still continues to carry on when and if God blesses you with children. Okay, so yeah, your altar begins as an individual, right? Your daily cultivation time, and then it will carry over into your family life. Okay? Something to emphasize. Okay? Even if you don't have a regular prayer time with your parents now, if you still live at home, you can initiate too. Okay? You can initiate. And sometimes parents' faith can improve because of the children. Okay? So sometimes, even though ideally it should be the parents guiding the children, sometimes it works the other way around. Yeah, and so you can also initiate. All right. This is a chart that I found online. It's from a 2012 study by a group called Wynne Gallup International. Right. Here you can see the top 10 atheist populations. Right. Look at these countries. You have China, Japan, Czech Republic, France, Korea, South Korea, right? Germany, Netherlands, Austria, Iceland, Australia, and Ireland. What do you notice about these nations? What do you notice? These are wealthier nations. The poorest one might even be China, because it's still developing. And so maybe that's also related to their political system and their education, right? Because it is a communist country, and in a way, the national religion then is atheism. Okay. And then, okay, now look at the top 10 religious populations. Right, we have Ghana, Nigeria, Armenia, Fiji, Macedonia, Romania, Iraq, Kenya, Peru, and Brazil. Right, these are poorer developing countries. Okay, and of course, yeah, I'm not saying that wealth is the only factor, because yeah, there are many factors, but you can see that loose correlation here. Right? That when people gain wealth and then enjoy a lot of luxuries in life, it's relatively easier to forsake God. And that is kind of a warning for us here too in America. America is not on this list, even though America is amongst the wealthiest nations. America is kind of unique in that sense. Right? There still is a decent size of yeah, decent size of Christians and religious people in the U.S. Self-proclaimed Christians. Yeah, so it's just a loose correlation, but but you can see a trend already, right, in America in the last, yeah, even last 100 years, but especially the last 20 years, more and more people are identifying as atheist, and especially your generation. You are Generation Z, I think. You guys, Generation Z? I'm considered in the millennials, yeah, older millennials, and I think the next generation they call Generation Z, and Generation Z is in America is by and large the least religious, right, in America. Okay. Yeah, so this is a definite trend, and if we're not careful, I think it's very easy to also just follow the crowd, right? Follow and be influenced by your peers. Okay. So stand firm, know whom you believe and why you believe. And NYTS is all about that. It's all about deepening your relationship with God. Unfortunately, we already have also seen some youth, right? You probably may know some too, who have slowly drifted away from God. Okay. And yeah, it's sad. Okay? It's sad. Yeah. Okay, let's go on. Let's now keep going, right? Let's go to Job chapter 1. Let's read from verse 6 through 8. Verses 6 through 8. Erlinda, please read.
Verse 6. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. 7. And the Lord said to Satan, From where do you come? So Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it. Verse 8. Then the Lord said to Satan, Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil?
Okay, verses 9 through 12. Sister Monica.
9 to 12. So Satan answered the Lord and said, Does Job fear God for nothing? 10. Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. 11. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he'll surely curse you to your face. 12. And the Lord said to Satan, Behold all that he has in your power, only do not lay a hand on his person. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord.
Thank you. Okay. These verses now moved to the heavenly realm, okay, where the sons of God were presenting themselves before the Lord. And what's happening here in the heavenly court is outside of Job's knowledge. Okay, he doesn't know that this is happening. But for the author who wrote this, he was inspired by God's Spirit to know this and understand this. Okay, so that of course is a little bit mysterious. We don't know who and how he wrote it, but the author knows this. Okay. Now in verse 6, who are these sons of God? If we look at Job 38, let's go to Job 38. Let's read verse 7. Job 38, verse 7. Let's go to Sister Aveline. Am I pronouncing that correct?
Verse 7. It's Aveline.
Aveline. Okay, Aveline.
Yeah, that. 7. When the
Yes.
morning stars sang together, and
Okay, I didn't hear that very well, but this verse talks about the morning stars and the sons of God shouting for joy. And this is part of God's beginning of God's speech to Job towards the end of the book, right? So this is God speaking here. And from verse 4 of this chapter 38, God was talking about the time when he was laying the foundations of the earth. So he's talking about his creation. And then he makes that reference to the morning stars and the sons of God shouting for joy. So based on this passage, it seems like sons of God in the book of Job is referring to angels. Okay, angels. So in different parts of the Bible, you might see the phrase sons of God as well. But then you have to interpret that based on the context. Because sometimes sons of God really is referring to humans. Okay. But in Job, sons of God is referring to angels. They're sons in the sense that they're also created by God, right? They're still a product of God's creation. Not product, but a existence that was created by God. Okay. And by the way, this tells us in verse 7 that music already existed before creation, right, in the heavenly realms. And that the initial use of music was to praise God. Do you understand that? So today, yeah, music's all over the place. Now it's so accessible, actually. Secular music, so accessible. There's so many different streaming platforms. These music videos too. It's back when I was little, I was young. I never watched music videos. Yeah, I didn't have cable either. I didn't have MTV or whatnot. Yeah. Now it's so common, and then it's very easy to get hooked into it. And then the imagery attached to music videos now is a lot of times it's actually sinful. Okay, so something to be aware of. And please understand, from the Bible, a proper theology of music, you can say, starts with this verse, Job chapter 38, verse 7. Right? Singing began even before the creation of the world. And its purpose was to worship God. nowadays singing has deviated from its initial purpose. It's deviated now for entertainment, and often it's actually for worshiping the artist, right? It's for worshiping some human aspect, actually, worshiping human pleasure, worshiping human luxuries and possessions, or human love, right? Which is very common. Yeah. So just something to keep in mind. Yeah. Okay, let's go back to Job 1. Okay. Now in verse 6, it mentions Satan. Okay. And in the original Hebrew, it has the definite article. Okay. Ha. Ha, and then shatan. Ha, it means the, and shatan means adversary or accuser. So Satan or shatan by itself, it just means adversary or accuser. And so sometimes Satan is used to refer to anyone who opposes someone, right? I think maybe one of the most memorable cases is when Jesus calls Peter Satan. Right? Do you remember that? And that's not Jesus saying that Peter is the devil, right? That is Jesus saying that Peter is opposing Jesus's will or God's will for him to be crucified, right? And to suffer. Because Peter was saying, no, this should never happen to you. But then Jesus said, get behind me, Satan. Okay. Yeah, so in that case, Peter was an adversary, an opponent to the will of God. Now here in Job, it's the Satan, Hashatan, right? So it's referring to the devil. Okay, should be referring to the main adversary, the main devil, right? Okay. We can also look at Zechariah. Let's look at Zechariah chapter 3. Zechariah chapter 3, and let's read verses 1 and 2. Zechariah 3, verses 1 and 2. Sister Justina.
Zechariah chapter 3, verse 1 and 2. Verse 1. Then he showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right hand to oppose him. 2. And the Lord said to Satan, The Lord rebuke you, Satan. The Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Is this not a brand plucked from the fire?
Okay. This is another case where the Satan, okay, Hashatan, also appears in the Bible. And this is part of a vision that Zechariah received where Satan was making an accusation against the high priest at that time, Joshua, okay, pointing out how he had filthy garments before the Lord and was serving. Okay, okay, so what does Satan do? In verse 7 and going back to Job chapter 1, verse 7, Satan describes that he goes to and fro on the earth and he walks back and forth on it. And so he is often here in the earthly realm. Okay. But apparently sometimes he appears before the Lord, okay, in the heavenly courts. So actually, don't think of Satan as God's opposer. You know what I mean? Think of him more as humans' enemy, the enemy of us, of the adversary of God's people. Because no one actually can challenge God, right? God transcends everything. There's no way for Satan to actually be a really opposing force. Right? It's like when you have a really big guy, 300 pounds, heavyweight champion, and you have a lightweight, 100-pound featherweight. I don't know what it is, right? No way, okay, they can compete, right? So the featherweight has to compete in his own class, actually. That's just no analogy is perfect, but that's just the analogy that just came to mind, right? Okay, so think more of Satan as really our main opposition, okay? And he's here in this earthly realm often, and he is observing and walking about. And what is he trying to do? Let's go to 1 Peter chapter 5. First Peter chapter 5, let's read verse 8. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. Let's go to Brother Joshua Chang.
Verse 8. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour.
Okay. All right, notice here it's your adversary. Your is referring to the church, right? The people of God. Your adversary, the devil, he walks about. And what is he walking back and forth? It's because he's trying to seek whom he may devour. Okay, so this is our adversary, the one that we need to fight against with the power of God. Nowhere in the Bible, as far as I understand, will you find a verse saying that Satan is God's adversary. Okay? And I have to double check that, but that's my understanding. Okay? In other words, yeah, again, no one really can challenge God. Okay? God is almighty. God is almighty. Oh, actually, that's actually something I was going to mention before too. We were talking about the theme of Job is suffering and the sovereignty of God, right? There is a word in the Hebrew Bible, Shaddai, right, which means almighty, almighty. Okay. This word is found the most frequently in the book of Job. Okay. Shaddai is the almighty one, right? You'll see as you guys have read, you often see like the almighty, right, repeated several times. Okay? So God is almighty. There's no one that can challenge him. Satan is the adversary of us, the people of God. Okay. Let us now go on. Okay. Now, when Satan was before the Lord mentioned Job himself. I mentioned this in the last class. God initiated this conversation. Okay? God mentioned Job by his own initiative. And he said, have you considered Job? Have you considered my servant Job? The phrase my servant also is very touching to me. Yeah, you'll see this in other parts of the Bible too. Right. Maybe that's something you can do too. Which other characters in the Bible are also referred to by God as my servant. Okay. That's something you can look into. So he calls Job my servant. Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil. So these are the 4 characteristics that were mentioned in verse 1 already, and God repeats them. Okay, so God really affirms that this is Job's character. And then Satan then responds saying, well, does Job fear God for nothing? In other words, there's a reason for that. Like Satan is suspicious. Satan is trying to come up with an explanation. Well, there's a reason why Job has been so good and blameless. Verse 10, have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? Right? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. Okay. Yeah. Here, Satan mentions a concept, right? A hedge around Job. Yeah, indeed. When we are when we are upright, righteous people, in principle, right? In principle, God protects us. He gives us this hedge so that nothing can really come near. Right? Yeah. Let's see. Let's look at I was just studying a chapter in First Kings recently. So this kind of illustrates it. Let's go to First Kings chapter 11. First Kings chapter 11. We won't read any verses, but just want to point something out. This is talking about King Solomon, right? This is King Solomon. And initially, Solomon was someone who loved the Lord. And God was also pleased with him. Right? And God appeared to him twice too. So God initially hedged him in. He had rest from all sides, right? Solomon was very much a king of peace, a king that didn't have to fight like his father David. Okay. But when you look at chapter 11, 1 Kings chapter 11, the first half talks about how he eventually was disloyal to the Lord. Okay. Verse 4 says, when Solomon was old, that his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. So what eventually happened? If you read the rest of this chapter, God raised different adversaries in the surrounding nations, surrounding territories, to come and be a nuisance, an enemy to him. Okay. So like verse 14, this is talking about a guy named Hadad. In verse 23, there's another guy named Rezin. And then in verse 26, there's another guy named Jeroboam, which maybe you know better. Right? Okay. So because Solomon forsook the Lord, was not loyal, that hedge then disappeared, right? Disappeared. So in general, just generally speaking, we do see in the Bible that those who are faithful to God will have that protection. And then those who are unfaithful to God may lose that protection, may be more easily attacked and have misfortunes come upon them. But this is just a general principle, because this is also something we'll see in Job too. Sometimes the righteous also will suffer, and then sometimes the wicked will prosper, like in the book of Ecclesiastes. Yeah, book of Ecclesiastes, the Solomon, right, or the author, he noticed how sometimes the wicked also prosper, and that's a great vanity. Okay, so but general principle in the Bible is that if you love God, you will have a protection, a hedge. And I think you probably heard many different testimonies like that. Have you heard of a testimony in some form where a brother or sister got into like a car accident and then had very little injury, right? Maybe even no injury at all. Have you heard a testimony like that? If you have heard a testimony like that, please give me a Zoom reaction. Okay, seems like over 80% have heard a testimony like that, right? So if you haven't heard one, I can share one with you right now. Right? Before I got married, my wife Joyce was driving, and she got into a huge car accident. Right, 3 months before we got married, she got into a huge car accident. The whole front of the car was gone, basically. Right, and we have pictures too. And she didn't have any injury at all, not even whiplash or any sores. Right, a huge truck hit her, and then she hit like the middle divider, and she spun out and wound up on the other side of the highway. And the whole front of the car was gone. And she didn't get hurt at all, right? Physically at least. Right? She was a little bit traumatized. She didn't really want to drive on highways for a period after that. But physically, she didn't have any injury at all, right? There's so many testimonies kind of like that, okay? And that's kind of related to that hedge that God gives often to those who love him. Right? Okay, but again, it's like a general principle. Yeah. Okay, going back to Job chapter 1, and we go to verse 12 now, right? After Satan makes his case, the Lord listens to it and he allows it, right? He's like, okay, if you say so, behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on his person. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Okay. So this is related to God's sovereignty now. This is outside of Job's knowledge, but what we can see for us as the reader is that the direct attacker of Job is Satan. But on the whole, it's something that God is allowing to happen. So everything in the end still is dependent on God's sovereignty. Okay, it's still dependent on God's sovereignty. So God is still the master, and he has the final say on all things. Right? Sometimes things may not happen according to God's will, but he may allow it, right? He may allow it to happen. And that's under God's sovereignty. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, this is something we can keep in mind. Okay. let's look at an example. Let's look at 2 Samuel chapter 24. Second Samuel chapter 24. Let's read verse 1. 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 1. Chris Wu.
Verse 1. Again, the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel, and he moved David against them to say, Go, number Israel and Judah.
Okay, keep in mind here how it's written. Okay, God moved David to make the census, right? All right, I want you to compare that to First Chronicles chapter 21. First Chronicles chapter 21. And let's read verse 1. Chapter 21, verse 1. Sister Clara.
Now Satan stood up against Israel and moved David to number Israel.
Okay. This is the same incident, but written differently. Okay. In 2 Samuel, it's God who moves David. And in First Chronicles, it's Satan who moves David. So is there a contradiction here? On the surface, it seems like a contradiction. But when you kind of go back to what we were talking about in Job, we can make better sense of it, right? The direct attacker to David is Satan. Okay, but on the whole, God allowed it. Okay, on the whole, God allowed it to happen. So First and Second Samuel is written. Is written from the perspective of kind of like all things come from God, right? It's from a prophetic tradition. First and Second Chronicles is written from a different point of view. Okay, it's more from a priestly tradition, I think. I have to kind of go back to my notes on that, right? So the author is going from a different perspective. Okay, yeah. But you reconcile these two verses by understanding that ultimately it's God's sovereignty. And then God allowed Satan to tempt David in this way. Okay. So same kind of concept in Job, right? Job chapter 1, verse 12. Okay. Let me just take a look at some of my notes real quick. Okay, yeah. Let's also look at a few other verses. Let's look at Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 8. Deuteronomy chapter 8. Let's read verse 16 and 17. Deuteronomy 8, verse 16 and 17. Jasmine.
16. Who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and that he might test you, to do you good in the end. 17. Then you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gained me this well.
Okay, this is talking about the Israelites' journey in the wilderness, okay, and which by no means was very easy. It's also a type of suffering. Right? Wilderness, there's no water, there's no food. Sometimes, many times no food. It's very harsh conditions. You're exposed to the elements, right? But why did God allow them to do this? Okay, yes, there's many reasons, but part of it is God saying that he wanted to humble them. He wanted to test them, to do good to them. Right? So sometimes God may allow difficulties and suffering in our lives for our own good, actually. And actually, sometimes it's to see if we're loyal to him, to test us. It's so that we do not become proud and say, oh, it's my power and my might that have gained me this wealth. In other words, it's to help us to remain close to God, always trusting in God. Okay. Let's also look at Deuteronomy chapter 29. Deuteronomy 29, verse 5. Verse 5 and verse 6. Verse 5 and verse 6. Sister Maria.
Deuteronomy chapter 9.
29.
Chapter 29.
Verses 5 and 6.
Okay. Verse 5 and 6. I have led you through the desert for 40 years. Your clothing has not worn out, nor have your sandals deteriorated. 6. You have eaten no bread and drunk no wine or beer. All so that you might know that I am the Lord your God.
Okay. So in our hardships, in the wilderness, in the suffering, God still often extends grace to us. Okay. But the last part of verse 6 also tells us another reason why God allowed us to go through that. It says so that we may know that the Lord is God, right? That the Lord is our God. So God often has a deeper purpose for allowing certain misfortunes or sufferings to come upon us. Okay? And for Job, Job also, he goes through this trial, and he also improves because of it too. Okay. Yeah. We'll continue from there, starting tomorrow. Okay. 2 hours already, and we didn't get through chapter 1, so we might have to speed up a bit. But we'll continue tomorrow. Okay. All right. Let's bow our heads and pray in silence.